Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coffee with Convery, the podcast that's your launchpad for career inspiration. I'm your host, Brien Convery, and around here we believe that success isn't just about climbing the corporate ladder, it's sometimes about building your own jungle gym. Each episode, we share real stories from all kinds of careers and all levels to help you design a career portfolio of sorts that fits you and your passions. So let's dive into today's conversation. Today's guest isn't someone who just noticed a broken system and she chose to stand between families and it. Christine Lai is the co-founder and executive director of the Special Education Legal Fund. Since 2018, her work has helped provide over 1.3 million in grants and thousands of hours of legal support to families navigating special education, families who too often feel unheard, overwhelmed, or alone. Christine's journey spans Wall Street to nonprofit leadership, but this conversation isn't about titles. It's about advocacy, it's about translating skills into meaningful impact, and it's about building systems that protect families when they need it most. Christine, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
So excited to get this conversation going. Rapid fire questions. Let's start there. What's your superpower?
You mixed up the questions, so now I'm like now I'm thrown. My superpower is persistence,
Persistence. Okay. Favorite subject in school?
history.
History. We all start somewhere. What was your very first job?
I worked in the meat department of a local grocery store.
There you go. Like cutting deli meat and
We
all?
weren't allowed so it was in the butcher's department, and we were not
Oh, okay.
actually allowed to use knives. So really, what we did was we just wrapped up stuff.
Okay. Okay. So you weren't the butcher, but you took part of it.
Wasn't the
Oh,
butcher,
okay.
like butcher adjacent, butcher
There you
assistant.
go. There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah. Bringing it to the table.
exactly.
If you had to describe yourself in one word, what would it be?
Wow. Driven.
Driven. It's a good one.
Driven, I think.
It's a good one. So I'd like you to take us all back to the beginning. Before the titles, the nonprofit, before the impact you've done, which is tremendous. Take us back to the earlier part of your career and take us through the journey from there to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I did not imagine, in any way that, my path would have led me to where I am today. I didn't know, graduating from college in, 1995, I went to work on Wall Street because that was, the career that, seemed like it made sense at the time. And it was a really challenging and interesting, period of time. It was really challenging and interesting career, that I
Yeah.
was able to, and I met great people. I met my husband, Craig. I met really interesting, challenging people through that experience. But I'd always had I don't want to call it a calling, but a sort of a desire, an inclination towards, working, in civil rights and social justice,
Mm. Hmm.
going back to, when I was quite young. I had thought I was going to go to law school. That didn't end up happening, for me. But the idea of, of pursuing a career in civil rights and social justice was something that I had really carried with me, throughout, high school and college, and and obviously at a certain point I was able to come back to it, with this nonprofit and with this mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So building that successful career in what we would call high pressure financial environments, was there a moment, personal or professional, where you felt pulled towards work that was more direct human and impact driven? And what made you listen to that pull?
Well, I loved my job. I loved working on Wall Street. There are not very many fields where you can be a woman in your 20s,
Yeah.
and be meeting with, CEOs, and, and having real access to, people who were making change, and, and affecting millions of people around the world. That was really a very exciting and interesting part of that role. But at a certain point, I remember actually, it was not just before I had my first child, who was diagnosed with autism. So I didn't know about autism or special education or anything at that point. But I had a friend from college who, sent me a job listing actually for Autism Speaks. And she said, you've always had this interest in, you know, advocacy,
Yeah.
helping people. I just got this listing, through, whatever, database, I just wanted to share it with you, thought you might be interested. And I didn't, I didn't, go forward with it. I remember seeing it in my inbox, looking at it. But that moment, was really the
Mhm.
first where I thought about, what is, what am I doing? What is, what am I supposed to be doing? Where, what's my path? What am I supposed to be, contributing to the, to the world?
Yeah, that seed was planted at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, of course, we were talking before I started the podcast. Your big debut on the Today Show, which we could talk about here too in this part, is that how that felt, what that was like,
Yeah.
the impact, obviously, that hopefully is having and rippling across now from awareness of founding the Special
Yeah.
Education Legal Fund, right, known as SELF, which fills a gap for many families who don't even realize they might be in crisis. But I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about self
Yeah. Absolutely.
and what problems were you seeing families struggle with, and why did legal advocacy become a lever for this change?
For sure. So, in the United States, education is a right. It's a civil right, guaranteed by law. And in, specifically, special education is a civil right that's guaranteed by law and codified into, federal law by the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And while people know that sort of in, amorphously,
Right.
what it translates to in reality with your own child is that, you know, your child is entitled to a free and appropriate public education, which is to say that they're entitled to have access to the education that any child has access to. And however, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes parents don't know that that's a right. Sometimes the provision of that right, the provision of services, the provision of, of supports for a child isn't, actually, doesn't actually work the way it's supposed to. So you can have a situation where children are either not identified as, having access to these
Yeah.
rights, or that they are identified, but the support isn't being provided in a way that allows them to, to learn and to, and to move forward and to grow. So those are sort of the two situations that are the most common in the education system, the special education system here in the United States, is, a child that's either not been identified or a child that has been identified but isn't getting the right support for their disability. And so that's kind of where we come in. Because it's a right and it's a right guaranteed
Yeah.
by law, it is one, but sometimes it's difficult to assert a right if you don't have access to the appropriate legal counsel
Mhm.
or professional advocacy in order to make that right a reality for you and your child. And that was really, for me, and our personal story is that we went through this with our oldest,
Yeah.
who has autism, and we were able to hire lawyers and hire advocates and make what needed to happen. But what I realized at the end of that, that process, with not that's it's the end of it. You're never done parenting, really.
Of course.
But what we realized was that there were so many families out there that didn't have the resources or the knowledge or the inclination to be able to push the system when it needed to be pushed. And they were just, their kids were just floundering. So
Yeah.
that's why we founded, Special Education Legal Fund. It was really to provide families with, with the funding so that they could hire a lawyer or an advocate to support them in the system. People always ask, like, well, why do they need a lawyer? It's like the school district has a lawyer. The school district
Right.
has
There you
access to a
go.
lawyer.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes you need one too if things, if things have gone awry or, whatever. So that's really the kind of roundabout story as to, how we ended up where we
Interesting.
are.
Interesting. And you often talk about bridging the gap between the families and the schools, right?
Hmm.
Like that's a big part of what you're doing.
Yeah.
From your perspective, where do systems break down most? And like, what do
Um,
families need to feel to empower themselves versus feeling overwhelmed? I mean, you
that's a
probably have
great
both
question.
feelings at the same time, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a lot, it's a little like navigating any system is challenging, right? Because you have the gap of knowledge, you don't know what you don't know.
Yep.
And you also have this navigational gap. You don't know what the next step is, how to move forward. It's a little bit like navigating the healthcare system, the healthcare system in the United States,
Yep.
where you have this massive gap in knowledge of what's going on. Let's call that the diagnosis. Like what is autism? What does that mean for my family? What does that mean for my child? What does that mean for his education? What does that mean for our his long term or her long term, life trajectory? And then you have the navigational piece of it. Is like, okay, how do I get my child the support that they need? How do I access what they need in school, in healthcare, in other supports, in after school activities, all of those kind of things. So it's sort of those two things. Where I feel like systems break down is most families are very much unaware that that this is a right that they're entitled to. Most families are very unaware that this is something that their school should be helping them with, should
Hmm.
be a partner in. And that is doubly true with families who are new to our country,
Yeah.
or who have a language barrier or a language gap,
Yeah.
and
There you go.
don't necessarily aren't as necessarily as able to navigate some of those questions, and those steps in the system.
Right.
So that's where I see a lot of I see a real breakdown in the system is those two pieces. Because,
Hmm.
and I mean, you don't know what you don't know what to ask for, you don't know how to move forward you know
That's right. That's right. Wow. Amazing. What a great thing you're doing, filling that gap and doing much more than that, helping these people with their lives and making a difference. I'm curious to reflect on your career pivot. And
Yeah,
many of the people
absolutely.
on this podcast are uh, discovering themselves in their careers or whatever, but there's also a lot of listeners who are making pivots or looking at their next chapter.
Yeah.
Looking back, and with your background, how did you figure out, how to build and scale a mission-driven organization and to make that pivot with transferable skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I wish that there had been a plan. There wasn't really a plan. I embarked on a career that was fulfilling and interesting to me, and gave me really tremendous skills in the years that I spent, on Wall Street,
Yeah,
and in investment management. There are so many skills that I obtained during those years that were, really, absolutely essential to what I'm doing now. The the chief one of those was, really the ability to tell a story. The
interesting.
my role, I was an equity analyst on Wall Street, and I followed insurance companies. So for many many years, what that entailed was analyzing a company and deciding whether it was a buy, hold, or a sell. And part of that process is getting to know the management, getting to know the company, and then being able to distill from all of that, what the elements of like this story is. What's this story? How's this company going to develop? How's the stock going to develop? And to tell that story to your investors and to your clients, and to make them believe what you believe,
Yeah,
and that would be the best for whatever investment that they're making. So that really was a really crucial tool that I was able to walk away from my Wall Street career with. Now, in terms of, it wasn't like I said, it wasn't a plan. There was no plan. But when my oldest son was born, it was pretty clear right away that, even though I had never heard the word autism before, I didn't really know what it was about. It was clear that he needed more from me than than maybe a typical baby would.
Hmm. Okay.
So that resulted in me stepping away from my Wall Street career and devoting myself full time to kind of understanding Spencer,
Yeah.
first of all. And then once we learned, Spencer has autism, that sentence has an ending. The What does autism entail? How does autism manifest itself in our son? How do we help him? How do we help ourselves? How does our family look? So that was a process. And and for most families, what that entails is how do I find a school environment that works for him or
Yeah.
her?
Yeah.
That was the main thing. And I mean, Spencer's in 8 schools, over the course of his, like, before he went to college. It
Right.
was not an easy road for him or for us. And it required, kind of 100% of my attention. But while I was going through that, I was learning kind of the steps of the advocacy process. I was learning about special education and really learning, like, kind of how unfair the system is and how it's
Yeah.
really stacked against parents. And I was just kind of thinking and putting these nuggets away in my head. What does this look like? What's wrong with this? How can it be fixed? And at a certain point, this was about you know and I kind of noodled with these ideas
Yeah.
over the
Of
course of like
course.
8 or 9 years. I
Yeah.
volunteered at different nonprofits. I was trying to get more, like more information, but I was just kind of working through in my head, like, what would it look like to try to solve this problem? Or not even solve this problem, because I'm not smart enough to do that. Like, what would it entail to make a dent in this problem for families? So because it's like, I mean, sometimes we're like, we start too big. You're like, how do we get world peace? It's like,
Yeah.
sometimes the more effective thing to do is, like, isolate a piece of that. What
Yeah.
can we do to solve this piece of that? And for me, it was, these families are slipping through the cracks. They
Yeah.
don't know what their rights are, and their children are languishing in the system. And how do I figure out how to give them what they need in order to get over that obstacle? And so the answer, as far as I was concerned, as so many things are, was money. These families need money to hire a lawyer or an advocate in order to get them through that obstacle that they're facing. And so, like, all right, so let's do that. Like, let's figure out a way that we could do that. And when we started up, I don't know, I haven't done an analysis on this in a while, but when we started up, we were the only organization of our kind that offered direct support to families in special education in the way that we were doing the direct grant support to families that needed an attorney or an advocate. And so, which is like, then you think to yourself, like, is this a good idea, or is there a reason that no one's ever done this before?
Right.
Um, and but
You're a
I was like,
trailblazer.
like that's where
Yeah.
the sort of drive or persistence comes in.
Yep.
I spent a lot of time thinking in the first few years, this I think this is a good idea,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to ask you for money. And much like if I were starting a business, or like, any initiative, like, I think this is a good idea. And then you go to your friends and family and your, like, broader network, and you raise money, and you're like, I think this is something that's going to help people. And we were able to do that. We were fortunate that we were that you know that I was able to do that. And then we were able to put, the money that we raised to work, and to see the very real effect of it. And we learned very quickly that it is a need,
Yeah.
and it is an unmet need, deeply unmet need. And there were lots of, there was lots of feedback from families, that we were really, um, you know, really plugging a hole,
Yeah.
in the advocacy and the support that's out there.
100%. And I'm thinking about, as you're talking through this, so many emotions going on when I think as you're learning about this. going through the motions of what you did, making those nuggets of I got to do something about this. You know, we're similar in age. We grew up around at the same time, but I don't remember conversations about autism or neurodiversity or the
Right.
spectrum or any of that growing up. So there's
No, of
no
course not. No.
training on how you
No.
do this.
No. No.
And then even now, with all these terms and different things coming and in the workplace, I work with people that are neurodiverse, right? And I work
Yeah.
with people that are, and
And that's amazing that
yeah,
that they share it with you and
yeah.
that you
I guess
created
because
an
I'm in
environment.
HR, that might be why too.
But
But
you've created an
yeah,
environment where where that is not only acceptable, but it's it's a place to thrive and it's a
it is.
and that's a great environment.
Yeah, but I think about like how much I've had to learn myself, even
Hmm.
understanding, and um, like for a mother or a family, like listening to this too, like it must be like so overwhelming in the very beginning of like like what you're
Yeah.
going through personally,
Yeah.
and then like where the hell's the help,
Yeah.
right?
It's really hard. It's so hard. I mean, we say mothers, but for parents, in
Yeah,
general,
but yeah,
when you go through,
but I'm always
because
my mom's son. I will always be your mom's.
of course,
It
and
is what
it's
it is.
generally, I mean,
Nothing
not
against the
to
dads.
nothing against the dads, but 90% of the time they're moms.
Yeah.
90% of the women, the people that reach out to us for support are moms. That that just is what it is.
Well, can I ask you on that?
Yeah.
Because is there also a fear factor to actually admit it or say it out loud?
I think that there is, so when we were going through this, with our son, it was a totally different world.
Yeah,
This was, kind of, almost 20 years ago.
20 years ago. Yeah.
And there was much less acceptance, and there was also much less understanding about, what what the path entailed, what it would look like. And I think that's the hardest thing for parents, in the beginning, because you hear these words and you don't know and it's like, what does that mean for my child?
Right.
What does that mean for our family? And what does that mean, for my child? Are they going to be able to hold a job, live independently, have a family, have a life? Like those are all the things that circulate through your mind when you have that diagnosis for the first time and your child's like 5, and so that's
Yeah.
a lot to take on at that point. And and the other thing that's also happening at the same time that that you're getting this diagnosis and coming to grips with that is that the school's calling you. They don't know what to do with your kid. They're like, can you pick them up early? Can you do that? You're like navigating all these doctor's appointments, therapists, this, that, and the other thing, trying to figure out what kind of support. So all of these things are happening at the
Wow.
same time. And it is very, very challenging for moms and dads who are going through that at the time.
Yeah.
There's also, you mentioned, is there a, I don't want to use the word stigma, but I'm going to use the word stigma.
Yeah.
Do families sometimes not want to admit that, like that this is a possibility, that this might be part of their reality? Of course, because, not because that,
You want to
there's
protect your kid.
it's really, it's like you want your child to live like a
Yes.
life that's like
Yes.
that's free of difficulty,
It's difficult
really.
enough, as we
It's
know.
difficult enough as it is, so
Yeah.
you don't want them to like, and that's what I always say. I have I'm doing a fellowship at the moment at Stony Brook University, which is on neurodiversity. And and I always say this to the self advocates that are in my group as well. I'm like, you have to understand that parents are coming from a position of love, and what they're
Yeah.
trying to do, and we don't know the answers. Like there's no manual to parenting. There's
No.
even less of a manual for autism parenting. So when we're doing things and we're trying things, and because we're trying to lay a scenario out for you that makes your life as easy as possible. And that's and so that's where most parents come from. And it's very easy to with hindsight, look
Yeah.
back and say, I should have done this. I could have done that. That's always a challenging thing. But you can only make the decisions that you make with
With the
the
information
information you
you
have at the
have.
time.
That's
Yeah,
exactly right.
absolutely. Yeah.
And thinking about like employers and things like that, like,
Hmm.
um, I think about that often, especially not just because I'm in HR, because I care as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
right? It's not just my
Because
position,
you're a
but
caring human person.
that comes before the role, right?
Yeah.
Um, but what is something like employers or institutions could do differently to better support families, caregivers, and employees navigating this stuff? Because I can only imagine the pressure of like, especially if you're working and you're like, oh, I got to take another day to go do an
Yes. I
appointment, or
have
I
a
gotta,
meeting, you know,
yeah,
oh, wait, this meeting's going on for 4 hours instead of 2 hours.
right, right, all that
That's a
jazz.
great question. I actually, there's, I had forgotten about this until you just said this, but there is a kind of growing employee benefit that I've seen in a
Mm,
couple of American companies where they have brought on not on staff, but like as a consultant,
yep.
like an advocate or an attorney who is a resource for their employees to consult if they have an issue with special education or
Mm, hmm.
some sort of legal channel that they're trying to address with their child that has special education issues. That's been something I've seen in the last 2 years, which I think is really exciting and and interesting, and great for families. The United States Army, the military, actually has a well, they did. I'm, like, I'm sure they still do, but if for no other reason that, people up top haven't thought about it yet, they have attorneys and advocates that work with their military families who move around a lot,
A
and
lot,
they
yeah.
help them get their child set up in the new school system with all the supports that they need. And which I think is a tremendous, is a tremendous asset, for our military families that are doing so much to, to support us
Hmm.
in the world. But I think that employers that are able to and have the scope to provide any sort of like consultative support
Yeah. Okay.
to their employees, because it isn't just a question about education. There's the whole like lifespan that we're talking about. You have the early phases when they're in school, and they're moving on, and then there's the after they graduate from high school, what happens then? And then there's the whole, myriad of systems navigation that has to come after they graduate from high school and move into the world, and for us, that is what happens to them, in terms of their housing, what happens to them in terms of their employment support, and what
Yeah.
happens to them in terms of the community support.
Yeah.
And that's an area where I really think that if employers could support their family, their employee family in that way, and provide some guidance through there's lots of organizations there that even just sort of a database of how to move through those life phases. I think that would be hugely
Oh my God,
supportive.
yeah. Totally.
I mean, I
Absolutely.
just got a question this morning from a family through their website that, his family was like, well, I don't know how to navigate, Social Security, and, disability. And I'm like, guess what? I don't know that either, but you're reaching out to me because I'm, sort of adjacent to that world. So the best I can do is point you in the direction of someone who might, but it would be great if
Through the
employers could
network.
be a repository
Yeah.
for information like that.
I have started to see an uptick in that type of benefit and
Hmm.
support systems. And I've also seen an uptick in the usage, which means people need
Which
it,
is great,
which
which
is
is
good,
amazing,
which
which
is
is like
meaning that
people
people,
aren't afraid to to ask the
exactly,
question, which is the first
exactly,
step in this.
which is the biggest step in this as well. So
Absolutely.
thinking about some of our younger audience who are
Yeah.
listening to this, wonderful person from Wall Street, right? Which is a big, I mean, it is like it's a big deal for especially for women on Wall Street, for
Mhm.
people of different backgrounds who may
Yeah.
be dreaming of all those things. What would you tell a young person who feels kind of torn between building this successful career and maybe doing what feels meaningful as well? Like you, I think
Right.
you can have both, but I'm just curious of
Yeah.
some
I mean,
advice you
I
might give to
think,
some of our listeners. Yeah.
I think that I really am a big believer that the where you are is where you're supposed to be, you know,
I love
and
that.
the steps that you take. I mean, if I look back at the path, my life path or whatever, it certainly wasn't linear, and I did
Yeah.
not end up where I thought I was going to be. But every step on the path was exactly where I was supposed to be at the time, and gave me, more importantly, gave me the piece that I needed to move on to the next stage of it.
Oh,
You know, you take the skills or the knowledge or the contacts or whatever it is, and you move on to the next piece. I definitely could not have done this going out, like graduating from school.
yeah.
I wasn't mission driven as I am now. I didn't have the mission come to me like I have, in the
Yeah.
last, 15 years. And I didn't have the skills to be able to do what I've done, at that point. I picked up those skills on the way, and
Yeah.
I picked up that understanding on the way. So, it's really, really important to, obviously, it's obviously if you're in a job and you feel like your soul's being destroyed,
That's
obviously
one thing. Yeah.
that's one thing.
Leave.
Um, that's one thing, and obviously you should think very clearly about what you want to be
Yeah.
doing if that's the case. If you're going home and and you're crying all the time, and that's a totally different thing. But you know I really thought about like every step of what where every step of where I've been has led me to where I am
I love
today,
that too.
and none of it would have been possible had I skipped any of those steps.
I love that because both of those expressions, like you are where you need to be. I think that's also very hard in today's world where there's so much coming at younger
Yeah,
people, social
yeah,
media, looking like everything's the best thing ever.
yeah,
Also, lots of comparisons to friends. I hear a lot of
yeah,
young students in university will say, but my friend's already got the da da da. I'm like,
yeah,
do not
yeah,
compare
yeah,
where your
absolutely.
friend is. It's not you, it's not your life.
It's like,
But
why do you all want to work at Goldman Sachs? Do you even
right,
know what you're trying to do? Like,
exactly.
I mean, not to pick on Goldman, but like,
No, but I get it. It's like
do
do
you even know
they
what that
hear
entails?
something, and
Yes,
I'm wondering if
exactly.
they know what that actually means.
Right.
And
I'm
this
like, do
goes
you know
back
that
to
means that you won't eat a meal outside of that office building for like 10 years? I
it's
mean,
like,
that's what it means,
oh, I
like,
know. I
I
know.
mean,
But how do we help? Like that's the thing that I always think about is
yeah,
and that's why I love where you said you are where you should be, because stop the comparison.
yeah,
Don't compare to your friends, to your family, to your parents, to whoever.
yeah,
Do what makes you happy, what you want to do. And like you said, each chapter builds the skills to bring the next thing.
yeah.
It kind of happens. I don't know why
It
people get
does.
so
Like,
worried about
and I don't know if this is because, my parents are first generation immigrants to this country, but I say this all the time. Craig's gonna kill me for saying this on your podcast, but my parents never thought to themselves like, am I happy? You know what I
it. Yeah,
mean?
I know what you mean.
Like their thought process is, am I putting like, do we have a better life? Is my child going to have a better life? Are we going to have a
Yeah.
better life because
Yep.
what have we done? Are we contributing to the world? Are we going to leave the world a better place than how we found it? That was always my parents' like, principal lesson to me was number one, whatever you're doing, do it the best that you can. Even if you're bagging groceries at the, if you're
Yeah.
wrapping meat at the, at the meat
At the
department,
deli.
you better be
At
the
the meat
best
department.
wrapper that's
That's
there.
right.
And the second piece of it is that for those of us who have been given much, much is expected.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility to to leave the world a better place than how we found it, even in however small way you want to you
Yeah.
want to parse that out. So those are sort of the things that that I think about, and and it's not possible for everybody to to look. I know very well that it's not possible for everyone to be like, I'm going to start a nonprofit tomorrow and I'm going to raise like money, and then I'm going to like I know that's not like something that everyone is going to be able to do because of life circumstances and the things
Yeah,
that like
exactly.
that are possible for us all. Um, but it is possible to to take what we've learned and just and move forward as we move to being the the 2.0, the 3.0, whatever
Yeah,
of our of ourself.
ourselves. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the newcomer piece too, even of your lived experience with your family, because I see that, obviously for those who don't know, I'm from the US, but I live in Canada now. And there's a lot of newcomers in Canada whose parents have completely, I'll say, given up their life to get their child here at
Yes.
18
Yep.
alone, by the
Yep.
way, to go to
Yep.
school and then find that first job. And the pressure on some of these individuals that I hear what those options will be when they're done with
Yeah.
their schooling is one
Yeah.
piece. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
whole nother, we could do another podcast. We
That's a
should do
whole other podcast. A
version
whole
two.
other
We'll do
podcast.
another
Yeah.
one. But yeah, but it's real. It's real life. Like that's what's happening, right? Like
Yeah.
they wanted to do better for their child and got them
Yeah.
to Canada, and now all's on them to find the
Exactly.
right.
There's all that, there's all that pressure, that expectation of what, and I think about like that with my parents. It's like, they got on a plane and moved here. They didn't know a
Yeah,
single person. They barely spoke the language.
right.
They're going to school. It's like, that's an incredible, thing. Like, how dare I complain about like, whatever like minor irritation is like, messing up my day. It's, but it's, I think that it's important to for those who are who seek to to change the world in some small way.
Yeah,
It's just to work on those things that to volunteer, to find something that
yeah,
you can tuck into the into the corners of your weekend
yeah.
that is supportive of some better life for someone.
Absolutely. And that's why I tell young people today is like, it's also a big deal at 18 that you came to a different country by yourself and may not even spoke the language. I look back at me at 18, I would be afraid to like go down the
I
street.
know.
I don't, I mean, that
Absolutely.
sounds silly, but
No, it's true.
I, right?
It's
It's just a
yeah,
whole
it's a
nother,
lot. I
like,
mean,
that's
an
a good
18-year-old is a
skill. That's
baby.
risk taking. That's
Yep.
like all those things. And that's why I tell,
Initiative, it's all this
put
stuff.
that in your narrative. Like
Yeah.
that is something you're
Absolutely.
doing. Oh my God, this has been such a fun and inspiring conversation. I wanted to see if there's maybe one big takeaway from your experience and your lived experiences and all the things you're doing. And thank you for what you're doing. Is there anything that you'd like to leave with the audience about something they may want to remember or think about as we round out this conversation?
I think that I would say, to parents who are out there and who struggle with, with parenting, just in general, and and parenting, maybe a child that's colors outside of the lines,
Yeah,
um, it's really important to forgive yourself. There are lots and lots of mistakes that that you will make along the way, and it's important to to just forgive yourself and keep on moving on.
yeah,
Because there no one knows your child better than yourself, better than you. And that's something that is you just need to hold to you when you're in a meeting with whatever authority it is, whether it be a a school educator or a doctor or any other kind of administrator, and they're telling you one thing. You know who your child is.
yeah.
That's the thing that that I hope that all parents can take away from this.
Perfect. And for those that want to follow up or see you on, your websites, and where can
Oh,
they find
absolutely.
you? Yeah.
So our website is www.spedlegalfund.org, and there's a wealth of information for our families, our American families, about legal stuff and advocacy and schools and and all of that other kind of thing that's housed there. And we do regular webinars, just to talk about
Awesome.
issues with families, because, like I said, you don't know what you don't know. And Yeah, that's the best way for us to, for your listeners to learn more about what we do.
Amazing, amazing. Well, first of all, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being on.
Oh,
the Coffee
thank
with
you.
Convery podcast, sharing your wonderful story. Keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing work. And it's just incredible. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian.
It's great to see you. So, for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Subscribe to the Coffee with Convery podcast at coffeewithconvery.com. You can also follow us on Instagrams for clips and behind the scenes stories and other things that will stir both your head and heart. This is Coffee with Convery, where we remind you success isn't always about climbing that corporate ladder. Sometimes it's about building your own jungle gym to success.